Juicy, tender, savory, smoked roast beef. Soft, delicious, fresh baked onion rolls. Creamy cheddar cheese sauce. Homemade barbecue sauce. All piled up together to become what I consider the best possible rendition of a classic Arby's beef and cheddar sandwich. You know, I've been craving a good beef and cheddar sandwich for a little while, but it's not all that convenient for me to get to an Arby's, but I have everything I need to make my own right here. So in this video, we're going to be doing just that, starting with what I guess I'll call a mini roast beef. That is, I'm going to be using an eye of round, or rather one of these kind of half eyes of round that you can commonly get at a grocery store, dry brining it, smoking it, letting it rest, slicing it super thin, stacking it up on some fresh onion rolls that I also made, barbecue sauce, cheddar cheese sauce from scratch, all the stuff that you would expect on an Arby's beef and cheddar, but 100% homemade and 100% delicious. The first thing I need to do is get my eye of round roast ready for dry brining. And that just involves patting it dry with some paper towel and then doing a little trimming. This thing is destined for roast beef sandwich slices, so I'm going to slice off all of the large areas of fat on the outside, as well as any silver skin I might see. Pretty simple stuff. Just cut off the fat while removing as little meat as possible. As for the dry brining, it's about as straightforward as it gets. I'll coat this entire hunk of meat in kosher salt, and I'll go pretty heavy with it, making sure to cover every side. Letting this meat dry brine for many hours is going to result in a juicier, tender, more flavorful roast because we're letting that salt liquefy and absorb deep into the meat. Once it's thoroughly coated in salt, I'll slap it on a wire rack and stick the whole thing uncovered into the refrigerator overnight, about 12 hours. Okay, bright and early the next day, and it's time to smoke this thing. So I'll get some lump charcoal fired up, and then into the Oklahoma Joe offset it goes, along with a small oak split. And while the smoker is coming up to temperature, we'll finish preparing the meat. First, a light slathering of olive oil. I don't always use binders, but that dry brine made the surface of this meat not especially tacky, so a little wetness in the form of olive oil is going to make sure all my seasoning rub sticks to it. My rub for this is very simple. It's mostly black pepper and onion powder with a very small ratio of salt. The meat will already be salty from that dry brine, so I'm going very light on the salt in this rub. My ratio here is 2 parts black pepper, 1 part onion powder, 1/2 part kosher salt. Once it's nice and coated in my seasoning, onto the smoker it goes. And of course, I'll stick one of my thermometer probes in there to monitor the internal temp. Now to just let it smoke away while I maintain a smoker temp of between 225 and 250 degrees Fahrenheit. In the meantime, we need to make some onion rolls, which are a must-have for any Arby's style roast beef sandwich. So into my stand mixer goes some milk, warmed up to 105 degrees, and my yeast. Give that a few minutes to bloom, and when it's looking nice and foamy, in goes 2 eggs, and then I'll mix for a minute on medium speed. Next, I'll add my salt, sugar, dough conditioner, and all-purpose flour. And then mix all that for a couple minutes on medium speed. And don't worry about quantities, I'll have the exact recipe for these buns in the video description. Once the dough has started to come together, in goes a couple tablespoons of room temperature butter, and then I'll continue mixing on medium speed for 10 minutes. Now to turn that dough out onto a floured surface and form it up into a ball. Then lightly grease a bowl, throw in that dough ball, cover with plastic wrap, and then leave it alone for 1 hour to rise. After an hour, the dough has about doubled in size, so back onto a floured surface it goes. And I'll press and squeeze it a bit to degas before starting to portion it out into my individual bun sizes. This recipe usually calls for 8 100-gram portions, but I want some larger buns for my roast beef sandwiches, so I'll separate it out into 6 133-gram portions. Then I'll take each piece of dough and form it into a tight ball, making sure any seams are on the bottom. Roll each one on the counter a bit to make sure it's good and taut, and then onto a parchment-lined baking sheet they go. Now to cover these sheets with some lightly greased plastic wrap and let them rise again, about another hour. Okay, buns are just about ready to bake, but there's two more steps we have to do first. I'll brush the tops and sides with a wash made from one egg and about a tablespoon of milk. And for the onion component of these onion rolls, I'll sprinkle a generous amount of dehydrated minced onion all over each one. Now the buns are going into a 350-degree oven for 25 to 26 minutes. Okay, time's up and these buns are looking absolutely beautiful. I'll let them start to cool for a few minutes and then transfer them to a wire rack to finish cooling. Jumping ahead a little bit, our beef roast is just about ready to come out of the smoker. But before that happens, I'm going to whip up a quick garlic-infused butter. I'll mince up a bunch of garlic, get a stick of butter melted in a little pan, throw in all that garlic, let it simmer for a few minutes, strain out the solid garlic bits, and my garlic-infused butter is ready for basting. Now my little roast beef has reached an internal temperature of 125, so we're ready for the searing step. Because this isn't an especially long smoke, the outside of the meat hasn't had a chance to develop an especially beautiful bark, crust, or even color, which is why I'm moving it over to the grill side of my combo smoker, and I'm going to sear it over high heat for a few minutes. I'll thoroughly baste it with my garlic butter and sear each side of the roast for a minute or two, making sure to completely obstruct the camera with my dumb hand and the bowl of butter. Anyway, once that meat is looking great and the internal temperature has reached about 135 degrees, I'm taking the roast back inside to rest. So I'll wrap it up in a couple layers of aluminum foil, but not before giving it one last brush with that butter. Now to just leave it alone for an hour or two. Resting time is finished and it's finally ready to sample. And of course I'm going to save the juices and drippings that collected in the foil during that rest, and you'll see why in a minute. As for right now, it's finally time to slice in and see how we did. And I'd say that is a gorgeous looking smoked roast beef. Lightly pink in the center, a nice looking smoke ring, and the smell is incredible. I think it's only fair at this point to have a little taste. Absolutely delicious. And while I would love to sit here and eat more of this succulent roast, its destiny is to be thin sliced and turned into sandwiches. Which means my next step is to wrap it up and put it in the refrigerator for several hours until completely cold. I know, it doesn't seem fair, but it'll all be worth it when I sink my teeth into the glorious beef and cheddar sandwich that awaits me. Okay, here we are at what has become day 3 of this sandwich making endeavor. My roast beef is completely chilled and it's finally time to slice. So I'm breaking out the electric meat slicer and getting down to business. This isn't a particularly great slicer, and it always takes some finagling to dial in the meat thickness I'm looking for, but its small size is basically perfect for this little eye of round, and these meat slices are looking mighty fine to me. But we can't get sidetracked this close to the finish line. Because this is going to be a beef and cheddar sandwich, we still have to make the cheese sauce. So I'll shred up an 8-ounce block of sharp cheddar cheese, and then get a couple tablespoons of butter melted in a saucepan over pretty low heat before adding 2 tablespoons of flour to make a simple roux. Let that cook a couple minutes, then in goes a cup of whole milk, a little at a time while whisking pretty much nonstop. Let it all simmer on low heat for a few minutes until thickened up a bit, and then in goes the cheese, again a little at a time, stirring constantly. And our creamy, velvety, delicious cheddar cheese sauce is ready, and that means we're officially ready to start actually putting together this sandwich. The beef in a beef and cheddar is served hot, and my sliced roast beef is fresh out of the fridge, so my next step is to heat it up, and I'll be doing that on the flat top insert for my grill. And this is also where the juices and drippings that I saved earlier come back into play. I'll spoon over some of that juice and immediately cover the meat with a pan lid to let it all steam for a couple minutes. And while the meat's heating up, I'll slice my onion roll, brush on some butter, and give those a toast on the flat top. Okay, meat's coming off, buns are looking toasty and delicious. Let's finally build this sandwich. I don't have any Arby sauce, but I do have my homemade barbecue sauce. So I'll spread some of it on the top and bottom buns, lay down a mountain of that juicy, amazing roast beef, ladle over what is probably way too much of the cheddar cheese sauce, add the top bun, and give it a light squish to create what ended up being my favorite shot of this entire video. Now take a long, hard look at that sandwich and tell me you don't want to sink your teeth into it. But alas, Unfortunately for you, you cannot. But fortunately for me, I can and I shall. I can't even tell you how good that is. The smoky, salty beef. I think I enjoyed those onion rolls almost as much as the beef itself. I can't find good onion rolls in any grocery stores, at least not around these parts, so I had little choice but to make my own. And they're basically my standard super soft hamburger bun recipe, except with dehydrated onion on top, and I made the buns a bit bigger than usual. So there you have it. My take on a barbecue style Arby's beef and cheddar sandwich. And I'll mention I got nothing against Arby's and I really actually enjoy their food, but the roast beef they're serving is most certainly a liquefied and recoagulated emulsion of meat product that comes out resembling slices of roast beef. And that's why they're super tender. Again, nothing against it, but there isn't anything quite like making it all yourself with completely fresh ingredients, ending up with slices of beef where you can still see the grains in the beef. And there's no question that this is just a slice of meat and not anything crazy or some Frankenstein concoction made in a fast food factory. But I digress. Check out the video description for a link to the full recipe for this smoked roast beef, the cheddar sauce, the buns, everything. And I'll also include some links to some of the tools and gadgets and things that I used in making this video, including my kitchen scale, which I highly recommend if you want to get into bread making or sausage making or all sorts of other things. If you need to measure your ingredients by weight, you really got to have one of these. This one here, pretty inexpensive, and it measures all the way down to 1/10 of a gram, which means it'll handle all of your meat curing needs as well as basically anything else. And be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future meat and smoking videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.